What's the deal, everybody? It's your boy Shane G, back once again with another episode of Politics as usual. So before we get started, please, as always, make sure that you like the video, you share the video, you comment under the video, and you subscribe to the channel. Now, what I want to talk about today is one of my favorite people. And I mean that sincerely. I don't mean any sort of, I'm not joking at all when I say that. I watch this guy's show all the time. I get a lot of information from his show. And I also feel that he is a gentleman who has not really steered me wrong in the 8 to 10 years I've been watching him. And that gentleman is Jimmy Dore. So, you know, obviously that's a controversial name in the political space, right? I really like Jimmy. And I think that he's one of the most honest, and he's one of the most honest political commentators out there. And I would also say that he probably has, from everything I've seen, obviously I don't know everything about everybody, but from everything I've seen, he has more integrity than a lot of other people. And when I say that, I mean, if he has a principle, he sticks to that principle no matter who's in office or who's in charge. He's anti-war. He'll come at Republicans for being, pro-war. He'll come at Democrats for being pro-war. He's against the principle of war. He's not against Republicans doing war. He's not against Democrats doing war and okay with it when the opposite side does it. He's anti-war, period, right? So, and I respect that about him because I've seen a lot of other channels, some channels he was affiliated with in the past, some people who used to be affiliated with his channel in the past. I've seen a lot of their position will change depending on who's in office at the time, right? That's not something I've ever seen out of him. I've seen him rally against ideas, rally against certain ideologies and things of that nature. And no matter who it is that's committing the thing that he's against, he'll speak out against it, right? So I really, really respect him. And I would also say that he's one of the people that's really good at sort of telling you what to expect when the entire media is saying one thing. He's good at being like, hey, this is actually what you should expect. And then the thing that he says you should actually expect typically is the thing that happens. That's usually what comes to fruition. So few examples of that. He was saying 2.5 years before Donald Trump's Russia trial that he was not going to be found guilty of anything. There was no real evidence. And in fact, there was actually more evidence to suggest that it was the Hillary campaign that planted all of that and got this whole thing started versus Trump actually doing anything. And that was all proven in court. You know what I'm saying? So he was one of those guys. He was very outspoken when it came to I still don't know really what I'm allowed to say on YouTube about it. So I'll say, the thing that was going on that caused everybody to go inside for 2 years. He was very early on about calling out people who had information that they were purposely not putting out there for a certain narrative to be pushed so that way they could have financial gain. I hope that made sense. But I'm speaking, obviously a little bit in parables because, again, I don't know what I'm really allowed to say about that subject on YouTube still. So, this being a relatively new channel, still trying to, but I think you guys know what I'm saying. So anyway, the reason actually that I'm making this video is to speak about one of the only disagreements I actually have with Jimmy Dore. 2, I guess, because he doesn't do this anymore. He's he bowed out of this game. So I guess these are 2 things I disagree with him on. I don't really disagree with him on this one because he just chose to stop partaking himself, which is perfectly fine. Everybody makes their own decisions, so that's kind of a joke. But I'll do this in your honor, Jimmy, because I'm talking about you. So what I will say that I actually disagree with him on to a degree is why he thinks, and I have to be categorical how I explain this, right? He seems to be under the belief that the only people who want censorship on social media, on Twitter, it's only establishment people who want to control a narrative. And that is the one and only reason that anybody wants any sort of censorship. And that the establishment is mad because average everyday people are allowed to freely exchange ideas that the mainstream or the establishment media did not want you to be able to freely exchange amongst each other. Again, going back to the whole control the narrative thing. I think that's part of it. I think that is true when we are speaking about the establishment only. And here is one of the best things that actually illustrates the point that Jimmy tries to make when it comes to this particular argument. Here's an article that I'm going to share with you all. And this is why it's dangerous. So this is from the Economic Times. And what they're essentially saying here is that Twitter suppressed COVID-19 information. They suspended top experts, alleged the Twitter files, aka the leaks of all of the information that was being exchanged, in the background of Twitter that obviously, regular people were not privy to before Elon took over. All of this was going on. So the US government pressured Twitter to elevate certain COVID-19 information and suppress other content, while the platform suspended reputed medical professionals who disagreed with establishment views during the peak of the pandemic, new Twitter files have alleged. So let's just stop right there. The government is telling Twitter, hey, elevate these accounts that are saying this thing that we think is good and we want people to hear. Suppress these accounts who are saying things that we don't want people to hear. And suspend accounts of medical professionals who are reputable medical professionals. We're going to suspend their accounts because we don't want their viewpoints being shared. Right? Independent journalist David Zweig released the new Twitter files on how the microblogging platform rigged the COVID debate and relied on bots and third-party contractors to moderate COVID-related topics. That sounds like what they said that Russia was doing for Trump. That's weird that they would do that themselves. Let's continue. Twitter censored information that was true, but inconvenient to the U.S. government policy. It discredited doctors and other experts who disagreed, and it suppressed ordinary users, including some sharing the CDC's own data. So I want to stop there for a second as well. The CDC was putting out information that was contradicting what the government said, as far as masks, as far as the negative effects of hydrochloroquine or, some of the other drugs that were being floated around that time, as potential treatments. Anybody essentially who was making the argument of like, hey, these other things could work. They were being removed from the platform at the behest of the government. I want to keep that part clear because everyone likes to make the argument, oh, it's not a free speech or First Amendment issue because Twitter's a private company. Well, if the government is telling this private company who is and is not allowed to speak on their platform, isn't that not the government enforcing the First Amendment? Or not, or rather they're not enforcing the First Amendment in that sense. Because they're the ones saying, hey, Twitter, we want you to silence these people. If Twitter did it on their own, then I would still disagree with it in principle, but the private company argument would make a little bit more sense then. But this is the government telling them, hey, we want you to remove these doctors. We want you to remove these users. We want you to suppress any information. Even if we put it out, if it still goes against our narrative, we want you to suppress that. But then raise up the other stuff that basically scares the shit out of everybody and, you know what I'm saying, is going to make them do the thing we want to do. that thing right there. So that's what that's about. So that is what a lot of Jimmy's argument is based on. And I will also say that I understand why he has that sentiment, because he himself, had adverse effects from the COVID vaccine. So a lot of his content became centered around that. It became centered around, hey, everyone's lying to you about COVID. And, here's science, here's, studies, here's reports, here's all these different things. Here's the CDC's own words giving you the reality of how COVID actually affected us versus how the media is telling you that COVID is affecting us. Right. So that became sort of like one of his main talking points, I would say, over the last few years, which very much understandable. However, this is where the disagreement comes in. I feel like he's so laser focused on the establishment not allowing doctors and medical professionals and people of that ilk the same right to speak out and use these platforms to speak out as they allow everybody else. I understand that that is a major part of his focus, but I think sometimes, what's the phrase? You get blind looking at the forest through the trees or something like that, basically, where it's like you're so laser focused on something that you'll kind of ignore the other concerns that people may have, right? I think that's the only issue I really have with Jimmy at this point, is because most of the things that he says that some people feel might be inflammatory to one degree or another, I actually understand exactly what he's saying. And I don't, if you're trying to be offended, you can be offended at something he says. But if you're really listening to the content in the context in which he's saying most of these things, it's not really, coming from a bad place. Like when he says America was so over Bush, basically, that we voted for a black guy with a Muslim name. Now, some people will hear that and they'll say, what, are you saying that black people and Muslims are bad? And why would they ever give them a chance to run the country? No, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is America historically has been so racist towards black people. And in that time specifically, we were extremely racist towards Middle Eastern people because 9/11 had just happened and we were, knee deep in the war in Iraq. Despite all of those things, we still voted for this guy because we hated Bush so much. That's what he's actually saying. You see what I'm saying? So there's two different ways to view a lot of what he says. So again, as somebody who's been watching him for years, I feel like he most of the time does a pretty good job of being thorough enough in his explanations to where people get it. You know what I mean? They understand exactly what he's saying. I know I'm saying a lot here. This is the point of disagreement. I do feel like he ignores the other concerns that people will have sometimes when it comes to censorship. Now, let me be clear in my position. I am not pro censorship. I believe everybody, except for the stuff that's already illegal, doxing, slander, libel, or direct threats of violence. Like outside of that, I feel like it should all be allowed to be said, right? Now, with that being said, I do understand the concerns of people. And now I'm removing it from the establishment and kind of putting it on just people in general, the citizenry, people at large. I do feel like there is a concern and people do want censorship to a degree because of the bigotry. It's not that people want censorship only because they're scared that people are going to talk to each other and exchange ideas. And I think Jimmy emphasizes that point too much almost, because it's like, then you're ignoring this stuff right here. So, for example, the AP reported that tweets with racial slurs, tweets with racial slurs soar since the Elon Musk takeover of Twitter. So Instances of racial slurs have soared on Twitter since Elon Musk purchased the influential platform, despite assurances from the platform that it had reduced hateful activity, a digital civil rights group reported on Thursday. Researchers at the Center of Countering Digital Hate found that the number of tweets containing one of several different racial slurs soared in the week after Musk bought Twitter. A racial epithet used to attack black people, the N-word, was found more than 26,000 times, 3 times the average for 2022. Now, mind you, this article was written, shout out to my dad, actually, it was written on his birthday, November 10th of 2022. So in that short amount of time that Elon had taken over Twitter, 3 times the total average for the rest of that year, you saw N-words in tweets. Use of a slur that targets trans people increased 53%, while instances of an offensive term for homosexual men, the F word, went up 39% over the yearly average. Examples of offensive terms used to target Jews and Hispanics also increased. They don't have a number there, but they increased too. All told, the researchers looked at nearly 80,000 English language tweets and retweets from around the world that contained one of the offensive terms they searched for. The figures showed that despite Twitter's claims from Twitter's head of trust and safety, Yoel Roth, that the platform has succeeded in reducing the number of times hate speech was being seen on Twitter's search and trending page, the actual volume of hateful tweets has spiked, according to the analysis from the center, a nonprofit with offices in both the United States and the United Kingdom. Okay, so that is a concern. Here, let me bring it up because I thought I had it up this whole time. There it is. So here's it's from the AP. So if you want to look at the article, this is what the top of it looks like. This is report tweets with racial slurs soar since the Musk takeover. So there you go. Here's the whole page. So yeah, I feel like if you're ignoring that just to make the point, no, it's only the establishment that wants to censor people because they don't want free speech happening between citizens. You're ignoring the concerns of people who say, hey, what about this? Now, for me, I don't think you should censor these things. I want to know who the racists are. I want to know who hates me so I can stay away from them, or I know how to act accordingly when I'm around them. You know what I'm saying? Be open with it. I want to know. I don't want you hiding that. And then I find out later that, you know what I'm saying, you're a racist and I've already, you know, in my mind befriended you or whatever. You know what I'm saying? You invite me somewhere and then I find out, like, you know what I mean, last minute that it's some bullshit. You know what I'm saying? Everybody saw that viral picture of that black lady surrounded by all those white women. And they said that was the last picture she ever took. And she passed away somehow during that girls' trip weekend. And none of the white women did. So you see what I'm saying? So I think sometimes when you speak from a perspective that you are outside of, you don't necessarily know how people feel about it. And when so you have to craft your argument in a way to where you acknowledge this, but then say, despite this, we still need to allow free speech because of reasons X, Y, Z. You see what I'm saying? You pull this up, you say, look, this is messed up. People need to do better. You know what I mean? We shouldn't be seeing a spike in, you know, all this crazy racial stuff just because free speech is now allowed. Now, granted, hate speech is free speech. As much as people don't like that, it's true as long as you're not saying anything illegal. Again, those 4 categories, you can hate stuff. You can hate people. You can do and say, or you can say whatever you want about people as long as you're not threatening them. So that's my thing is, while the conclusion may be the same as far as don't censor, you know what I'm saying? Like, let it go. Unless it's one of those 4 things, let it go. You know what I mean? Let people say what they want. Twitter's a bathroom wall. Nobody monitors who's writing what on the bathroom wall. That's what Twitter is. Cool. You can make that argument, and I think you could still convince people, but you can't pretend like this isn't happening, or you can't pretend like the establishment is just using these things as a reason to try to get you to be on board for censorship. You see what I'm saying? Because to ignore this makes it seem disingenuous. I'm not saying you're being disingenuous. He's never going to see this video, but if he does, you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that you're being disingenuous. It just comes off that way if you don't acknowledge that this is happening too. That's all I'm saying. Now, here's another article that covers the same topic. This is from Business Insider. Use of the N-word on Twitter jumped almost 500% after Elon Musk's takeover as trolls test the limits of free speech. After the self-proclaimed free speech absolutist Elon Musk closed the $44 billion deal on Twitter, anonymous accounts set about testing the limits of the social media's platform moderation policies, the Washington Post reported. The Network Contagion Research Institute, a research group that analyzes social media content to predict emerging threats, said that use of the N-word on Twitter increased by nearly 500% in only 12 hours immediately after Musk's deal was finalized. The newspaper also noted that several online trolling accounts called on others to use racist language in the aftermath of the deal. Elon now controls Twitter, unleash the racial slurs. Jewish slur and N-words, said one account, using slurs for Jewish people and black people, per the outlet. I can freely now express how much I hate N-words. Thank you, Elon, another said. The journalist David Levitt also noticed an increase in accounts tweeting hate speech. He tweeted on Friday, "There's a massive flood of literally hundreds of people each minute using the N-word and rampant hate speech happening on Twitter right now after the Elon purchase." Twitter was also flooded with sexist and anti-LGBTQ messages per the Post. Anonymous trolling accounts ran tests on Twitter's moderation policies by calling for the dead naming of transgender people and the use of offensive terms like groomer, according to the report. Almost immediately, I noticed an increase in anti-trans harassment. It's very visible, said Aaron Reed, a trans activist and queer legislative researcher, per the Washington Post. Okay. So there's two big studies and articles that are documenting that very shortly after Elon Musk took over Twitter, the increase in hate speech went up, according to this report, 500%. Okay? So again, to pretend like people only want censorship because they don't want people talking to each other and exchanging ideas is disingenuous. If you want to say specifically the establishment is using it as a tool, you know, for that reason, because they want to control the information flow, then I'm with you. But to blanket that with everyone, I think some people are genuinely concerned about this. And I'm talking about, again, just regular everyday users. I'm not talking about the establishment necessarily, but people who I see say that they essentially want censorship. They don't want to call it censorship. They feel like, no, hate speech isn't free speech. It is. Sorry, it is. Like, unfortunately, you know, maybe in some situations, unfortunately, it is. It's not illegal to say you hate people or things or to call them names. None of that's illegal. So that's the issue. The issue is that there are average people who use these platforms who are like, I'm done with this platform because there's too much of this going on now. Now, are you calling those people snowflakes who can't handle the harsh realities, or do they have a, you know, you see what I'm saying? Like, it's more that. So again, I'm just illustrating the point that it's not only the establishment who wants to use censorship for nefarious reasons. It's also average everyday people who just want to be able to get on Twitter and not be called the N-word. You see what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of that too. So I just feel like if Jimmy acknowledged that a little bit more, that would be a good thing. That's really all, you know. So anyway, this is the last thing that I want to speak about, just because we did just celebrate Juneteenth. It just passed. And I just want to read this Twitter account. You know, a friend of mine sent me this. This was on Juneteenth. So let's go over some of these tweets. Almost 500,000 views on this tweet. Lots of activity in this thread. I just want to put that out there. So he says, I'm celebrating the spirit of Juneteenth by walking around in public with a shower cap on while having obnoxiously loud conversations on FaceTime. Somebody else says, I'm going to steal some shit from CVS today. Somebody else said, we need a bingo card, loud music in public, shower cap, the words finna and axe you, loud swearing in public, going to play basketball at 10 a.m. with an ankle monitor on. What am I missing? Maybe you could carry around a dying smoke detector to get the beep. Never understood the speakerphone conversations everyone else has to listen to. I don't want people knowing my business, but maybe that's just me. I practiced my shooting today. Unfortunately, I hit my target and I was hanging out with my dad. Juneteenth fail. In slippers, I hope. Exchanged text with my brother this morning. The company he works for doesn't celebrate this holiday. We've decided the company must be some commie outfit for making their employees slave for the man on such an important American holiday. Obviously, that's tweeted in sarcasm. I'm going to pretend to mop my driveway and watch while the cops are at my neighbor's house. So I think we see what's happening here. Just a bunch of racist stereotypes that people, were using to make fun of black people on Juneteenth. So in conclusion, again, I love Jimmy Dore. I watch his show all the time. I get a lot of valuable information. A lot of my talking points and my arguments come from his show. I'm sure if you have watched his show and then you've watched mine, you can see that. He's a big influence on my politics. I won't even pretend otherwise. However, I do wish he did a better job of, while rallying against the establishment and talking about how the establishment tries to use tactics like race and gender identity and things of this religion, things of this nature to separate us. And they use censorship as a tool to restrict the flow of information, the free flow of information between people. The free flow of information between people so that way they can control a narrative. I'm with you 100%. I don't think that that's false in any way, shape, or form. I think that that is 100% the truth. My only issue, again, is if you neglect to mention that, hey, some people are saying they want censorship because of 500% increase of the N-word, 38% increase over the last year when it came to, LGBT slurs and, things like that, right? Yes, that is happening. And although that is sad that that's happening, the reason why you have to allow it is because then they will use that as a reason to censor other things, such as doctors and XYZ. I think that's really the only distinction that Jimmy could make a little bit more often that would, maybe make the message a little bit more palatable to people who aren't already fans of his show. Because again, I've been watching for 8 years. I've been watching since he was back on TYT, and he was the only one to stand up. Actually, it's probably been 10 years. I've been watching him since 2014, I'm pretty sure. And he's been, he was one of the only people to stick his neck out with certain things when it came to, the Bernie versus Hillary situation, with Russiagate, all of this stuff, right? He was like the only one to really stick his neck out. And then, when I felt like they kind of changed their messaging and stuff like that, I was still more aligned with how he felt. And I felt like, again, he did better. He was better at proving the things that he were going to say were going to come to fruition than most other commentators, I would say. This isn't just, about who he used to work for. But so I've been watching him since back then is the point. So I've been able to see all of his takes. So I know the complete. That's why I'm able to sort of make some of these arguments and say, hey, maybe say it this way, because I know that this is how he more feels than not. You know what I mean? Jimmy's not saying that racism doesn't exist. He's not saying that he likes seeing hate speech. Like, you get what I'm saying? I don't think it's any of that. I think his actual point is you have to allow it. Otherwise, they'll use that as a reason to censor other things. And again, I totally agree with that. But you at least have to acknowledge that this is happening, though. That's the only point of contention I really have. You have to acknowledge that this is happening. Yes, there's a huge increase in bigotry that comes with essentially being allowed free speech on the platform. And I do notice that the only time that you really do mention when he's censoring is when he is censoring somebody that is either coming at him or saying something that he personally doesn't like. And then he might censor those people. And then, you know, you'll mention like, hey, he's not really totally on board with this free speech thing. Here's a few examples of him not allowing people to exercise free speech. So I do like that you'll call Elon out. But I think this is part of the calling out that has to, you know, take a little bit more place, that I would like to see take place a little bit more on your show. If you said, look, yes, with free speech, there's going to be some hate speech. And that's unfortunate. It's not good. But you have to allow that hate speech if you want a free flow of information to truly take place. You know what I'm saying? Because you have made this point before when you say it's actually negative towards minority communities to take away free speech because that's the thing that they have to use. They have their voice that they can use to try to get people, you know, on board with whatever it is they're trying to do. And again, totally agree with your point, but make that point more rather than, because then you're going to be able to convince average everyday people that censorship is a bad thing. You see what I'm saying? So again, in my opinion, it's not just the establishment wanting censorship because they want to control the narrative and that's the end of the story. I do think that there is a sizable amount of people in the public that have either stopped using it or, you know, encourage others to stop using it. And it is because of the bigotry that we saw the numbers. It spiked after Elon took over. So again, that's my only point. Love you to death, Jimmy Dore. I plan on seeing you next time you're in Arizona. I'm going to definitely keep watching the show. You, Kurt, Steph, you know, y'all are doing y'all shit over there. I definitely love it. I'm going to keep watching, you know, and hopefully, I mean, it would be really dope if you saw this video, you know what I mean? It would be really cool. You know, that's all I'm saying. Just acknowledge the totality of the reality that's going on. And I do think that you will be able to get more people on board with the message. Because if you acknowledge the reality, but then explain why it's a necessary evil, I think you'll get people more on board. But that's just me. This is Shane G. This is Politics as Usual right here on the Ethos Media Network. Please, as always, make sure that you like, you share, and you subscribe for all the latest content. Bar exam on Mondays, a trip to Venus on Fridays, OTI on Wednesdays. And that's it. Love y'all. Peace.